Jackie O. You're not going to get far in life with that theory.
Well, I'm loving the banner. They are on the field at Sun Life Stadium in Miami. We're 2 hours away from kickoff. Mike, I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahomans video studio, a live pregame show, if you will, before Clemson and OU tackled each other in the Orange Bowl. I'm joined by Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman. How are you doing, sir?
Doing great, Dave. The game is finally here, almost.
We've heard a lot of pregame hype. We're watching Macklemore and Ryan Lewis on ESPN downtown. The Beach Bash underway. Again, we're 2 hours from kickoff. And joining us from that very stadium is Barry Trammell and Jenny Carlson, who may or may not be able to hear us. Tim Money behind the camera down there. Barry and Jenny, how are you?
We're doing well, gentlemen. Nice sunny day.
A little warm.
Yeah.
Little rain in the area, but that's Miami for you, I think.
Yeah, it's since we got here 5 days ago, it's fluctuated between 77 and 82. So they've that's 4 a.m. or 4 p.m. doesn't matter.
We're up in the 30s, perhaps the 40s here today. Certainly nothing South Florida weather like, but I did hear the conditions there for game time will be kind of humid, which is a little bit different than perhaps what the teams have been practicing in.
These guys had their feet in the Atlantic Ocean this morning.
I didn't,
but Barry and Jenny did. How was it, folks?
Yeah, you know what? Well, it was great. You know, I've been working so much since I got here, I really hadn't had time to do anything. As I told you, I went 67 hours without even going outside. But this morning, Jackie O went for a run, and when she got through, we went down to the beach. We had a good time, Jackie O.
Yeah, no, it was great. Yeah, it definitely, I was thinking back, the last time I ran in Oklahoma, I think the wind chill was about 35. I think this morning when I ran, it was probably in the 80s. So I was a little bit worn out, but yeah, no, the beach was great. Not too many people out there when we went this morning, and yeah, it was fantastic. Really, I mean, that's not something you get to see in Oklahoma. If you come to Miami, you got to at least go stick your toes in the water for a second.
Miami, South Florida have fantastic beaches. You have to do that. I have one running story for you. I remember one time I went to the Air Force game at Colorado Springs. I was with Barry, and when George Schroeder was with us at the time. Now, George was a runner. He was like, hey, Dave, you want to go for a run before the game later today? I was like, sure, I'll tag along. Altitude, 9 miles later, I'm trying to keep up with George as he's running through the trails. One of the worst decisions I've ever made. Number 4, Oklahoma 11-1. Number 1, Clemson 13-0. 3 p.m. kickoff. You can watch it on ESPN from Sun Life Stadium. You can follow our gang's tweets online on Twitter, of course. Mike, I'll start with you, and then we'll toss it to our crew in Miami. Perhaps the big story today leading into the game, Oklahoma redshirt sophomore defensive tackle Charles Walker suffered a concussion earlier this week. He will miss the game.
Yeah, and you know, Jason Kersey wrote a really good story about him. I think it was back November 12th. Really starting with the impact that Walker had against Tennessee. There was a lot of momentum changing plays in that game. Most of them we think of from the offensive side, but Tennessee didn't do anything in the second half. Walker had a tackle for a loss that really sort of started the thing rolling for the Sooners. He's second on the team in tackles for losses. We've been talking this week about the losses for Clemson. 3 players sent home, including a receiver, a defender. Now all of a sudden it's the Sooners who lost somebody. It's, from reading our guys' stuff, it's a position of depth. But still you got to worry. It's not. You want to go play with Charles Walker, and they're not going to.
Barry, Jenny, we'll throw it to you guys in Miami. Your thoughts on Charles Walker not making this game?
Well, Charles Walker will be missed in part because of the conditions of this game. It's a humid day, and they're playing a quarterback that's going to run around and make that D-line exert a lot of energy. So I think Oklahoma does have good depth, but they're going to miss him on a day like this.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, you want all your guys, and clearly, I mean, Charles Walker has quietly been an anchor type of guy on this defense as this season has gone on. He doesn't get talked about like Eric Stryker or even of late as much as a Charles Tapper, but clearly, you know, you want your best guys, and it's probably a position, though, that if you're going to lose somebody late in the proceedings, maybe defensive tackle or defensive line is an area where they can sustain a loss like that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, you want your best bullets in the gun for one like this.
You know, Clemson will miss those guys, but Crane there at the wide receiver. Most teams has depth. Most elite teams have several good wide receivers. I doubt Clemson misses him a ton.
The guy I'm looking at, Dave, is Jordan Wade, and Jason Kersey's got a post right now on News OK. where he outlines the 3 people that will need to step up or will play more in Charles Walker's absence. Jordan Wade was a guy who last year, in the Bedlam game, for instance, he made some big plays. He looked like he was really coming on, and not as much this year. So we'll see what we get out of what the Sooners get out of Jordan Wade. You can read that post right now on News OK. Jason's outlining 3 guys. Another one, Marquise Overton, a guy from Jinx.
Barry, Jenny, question for you guys. What are you hearing about the smack talk being talked between these 2 teams as we talk about player personnel? Did I hear that it was a Clemson player perhaps that jumped on a bus?
Well, Dusty Dvorak says that Shaq Lawson, the Clemson defensive end, got on a OU bus yesterday and did some smack talking. I have no idea if that happened or not. I can tell you that in this age of enlightenment where nobody says anything, that any kind of realistic talk is sort of taken as a major affront. This is not at all, in my opinion, any kind of major deal. The talk that's been going back and forth. You know, Pirine said the Clemson's defensive line is not as good this year as last year. Well, guess what? It's not. Leggett, the Clemson tight end, said that the Clemson offense plans to do exactly what it wants to do. Well, that's what it ought to plan to do. I think all this talk is way over-talked.
Let's play a game. And by the way, as if on cue, the Oklahoma football team is walking in the stadium behind us here. We're starting to see evidence of players on the field. Eric Stryker walking this way with strength coach Jerry Schmidt. See some other guys out there. I'm sure we'll see more here in the next few minutes. Obviously, the Sooner team buses have arrived, and the Sooners will be coming out and walking around. But no, you're right, Barry. I mean, smack talk, bulletin board material, I don't know. To me, that just doesn't, it doesn't last. I mean, maybe it's the thing that, you know, a coach or a position group talks about in the locker room before they go out on the field. But, you know, is that something that in the fourth quarter makes a huge difference? I can't imagine that's going to do a whole lot. So, you know, it feels like some of the Clemson people had the feeling that OU was smack talking. Some of the stuff Clemson said seemed like maybe it was smack talking. I don't really think any of that matters at the end of the day. I think whoever has the best team comes out today and wins this ball game and, you know, plays the best. So I just don't see that being a huge factor today.
Well, you know, it reminds me of an old friend of mine whose dad always had a saying when it talked about which side is God on. And this old man says, God is on the side of the team with the biggest tackles. That's whose side God is on.
It's as simple as that. I think Barry and Jenny are exactly right. The smack talk, frankly, kind of good to see. You know, from a fan's perspective, you want these teams to be fired up, and there's enough gap between the last game and to this game that it just fires up the hype.
To quote the late, great Earl Weaver, there ought to be bad blood between all ball clubs.
Sure, absolutely. The old Baltimore manager.
There you go.
Speaking of such, the Oklahoman, I'll give us a plug here. The cover today, very nicely done, Mike, by your sports crew here. Revenge is the cover there. And one thing we've been doing all week long in the Oklahoma, these collector editions. If you haven't had a chance, go to your newsstands today. And this is a look at the last national championship OU won under Bob Stoops, of course, their 7th national championship, which was played right there in Miami. This was back in 2000. The national championship collector poster. You can find that in today's editions of the Oklahoman. Mike, last night we heard that the TCU quarterback got into some trouble before his game. A little bit of a segue out of our game here, but still, players will get into some shenanigans sometimes.
Well, you got Robert Nkemdiche, I think I said his name right, Dave, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss, allegedly smoking some sort of synthetic marijuana, falling out of an Atlanta hotel room, suspended from the Ole Miss team. His career at Ole Miss is now over, so he won't be playing against Oklahoma State in the Sugar Bowl. What's going to happen to Boykin? It's hard to see a scenario in which he plays for TCU. Gary Patterson is really, you know, your quarterback sneaks out of the hotel after curfew and then gets into it, bar fight, spills out. I guess he struck a peace officer. That's the allegation. Spent the night in jail. You know, can you see a guy like that under center for your team? If you can, you're really desperate. Maybe the Oakland Raiders under Al Davis. I don't think TCU, Texas Christian University, doesn't sound like a playable scenario.
TCU takes on Oregon on Saturday as the bowl games continue. Back to OU and Clemson. Mike, I'll start with you, then we'll toss it to our crew in Miami. Things to watch for today.
Well, I think Barry wrote about this in this grand publication. Of course, Jenny had this, Dave, I unfolded it. She's got the Crimson and Cream tour,
Very
the
nice.
Revenge tour with the dates and all that on it. Rob Backus did our illustration.
Good job,
Jenny
Rob.
wrote the main story on it. It was sort of this revenge angle. I don't think that's going to be a factor in the game. I do think what Barry wrote about, tackling the quarterback, is going to be a big deal. I think you got two elusive quarterbacks. I think Mayfield is a handful. Tennessee didn't have much luck getting him on the ground. Who has? The Texas Longhorns, that's about it. I think we don't know how OU's going to do against Deshaun Watson, but tackling him is going to be a huge thing. The longer these plays go on, the worse it is for the defense. So I'm glad Barry wrote that. I think it's a huge deal.
Barry, Jenny, your thoughts on things to watch for today?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll look back at Oklahoma's season this year, and at the signature plays. They come from Baker Mayfield with his feet. That third down conversion at Knoxville, where he breaks so many tackles, hits Sterling Shepard on the sideline, keeps a drive alive that they had to have. The runaround play at Baylor, where he makes a great escape from the pass rush, dumps a touchdown pass to Dimitri Flowers that sort of seals the game. Tackling Baker Mayfield is paramount for Clemson, and conversely, the same thing with Deshaun Watson and the Sooners. But to me, getting the quarterback on the ground is the biggest key in this game for these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely is a focus. You know, and so much has been said about these two offenses. Clearly, you know, the two most exciting quarterbacks in all of college football in this game. So, you know, offenses that are going to score some points. You know, I just think the defense that gets a big play at a timely moment in this game, whether it's a turnover, a stop, a reverse of field, something that really changes the complexion of the game. And I suspect it'll be a second half type of play that I'm thinking about, you know, whether we're talking third or fourth quarter. But, you know, I think the defense that finds something, you know, late in the game, that something else that gets them that final play that may be determining, because I do think these offenses are going to score some points. These defenses are really good, but I do think the offenses are going to score. So defense has got to find a way to make that defining play somewhere late in this game.
Barry, I have a question for you. Did you expect to be there where you are right now at the beginning of this season?
I didn't expect to be in the Orange Bowl well into November, for crying out loud. Even after the comeback against Kansas State, putting aside that Texas loss, it looked like the climb up the mountain was too severe for Oklahoma, especially having to play 2 of the 3 big games in November on the road. But the Sooners gelled. They got a lot better. They won those 3 games, and the dominoes fell right for Oklahoma. And by late November, it wasn't a question of would Oklahoma be in a big bowl. It's which big bowl would they be in? Would they be in Arlington, or would they be here in Miami? So, no. In October, after what we saw in the Cotton Bowl against Texas, no way could you think that the Sooners would be here in the Orange Bowl.
No, I mean, you saw both offense and defense get dominated by Texas, and especially the defense getting dominated by Texas when Texas had no illusion of passing. They weren't trying to throw the ball. They were just running it down Oklahoma's throat. So for the defense to have really not been able to stand up at all to that Texas offense, it was shocking. And you thought, well, how can they stop a Trayvon Boykin? How can they stop a Baylor and OSU? It just seemed impossible at that point. But here they are, having knocked off those teams. Now, I will say, and I wrote this a few weeks ago, we just saw Clemson come in, and Deshaun Watson was one of the guys I spied. He looks like he's ready to walk down a red carpet or a runway. He was dressed to the nines, unlike OU here in their sweats and their workout stuff. But anyway, he is unlike any quarterback that Oklahoma has faced. Let's be honest, TCU, Baylor, OSU, all were playing backup quarterbacks, which, no knock against Oklahoma. They went out and dominated like you should against a backup, but he's not a backup. He's the real deal. He can do everything. So they're going to have a huge challenge on their hands in Deshaun Watson tonight.
Well, now that Jenny puts it that way, Dave, I got to say, when Barry was talking about what much of a surprise this was, I thought, you know, here's how big of a surprise it was. Sometime after the Texas loss, there was a flatbed truck spotted going down Lindsay with a Bob Stoops
with a certain statue on it.
On the back, not covered. And we all laughed, and we thought about numerous jokes we could add here, and it was an embarrassment for the university. Apparently, maybe even Stoops was embarrassed. There seemed to be strong and now we wonder, is it time to call that foundry down in Fort Worth and tell them, you know what, maybe today would be a good time to start your way back up I-35. Let's get that in some sort of storage, because here in a couple weeks, somebody might want to be putting a statue down. Of course, Deshaun Watson, as soon as Jenny started talking about it, I'm like, hold off on the call to Fort Worth.
Yep.
Let's let the foundry keep it down there for a little while longer and see what happens. That is the challenge for the Sooners. And you look at these backups the Sooners have played, they're not the same thing as they're going to face today. She put it quite well. Watson
and Mayfield kicking off here in less than 2 hours. Mike, I'll start with you, then we'll throw it to our crew in Miami. Final score prediction.
Oh, I think I said 34-28 Sooners in our big, gigantic picks grid that we did, in which we picked 35 games. And I was running out of score ideas by the time I got there. 34-28, high-scoring game. I still think the Sooners got a little more offense, a little bit more big play, maybe a little more magic than Clemson.
Barry and Jenny, your thoughts?
I will go with the Sooners 26-24. Well, I'll go with the Sooners 26-24. It's a 50-50 game. I don't have any great reason for picking. I will say this. The performance of the ACC in the bowl game so far shows that their conference is a little inferior. Maybe that's where OU has the edge.
Yeah, I go OU 38-35. At least I think that's what I picked. I've slept since then. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to, like I said before, I think it's just going to come down to the defense making a play. And this Sooner team has found a way. They found a way to get themselves back into the national championship hunt. They found a way to reinvigorate a season that looked dead in October. Why wouldn't they find a way to make a play here on the biggest stage that they've played on so far?
Fantastic. Mike, any final thoughts?
Enjoy the game, folks.
Barry Trammell, Jenny Carlson, thank you so much for joining us from Sun Life Stadium. Enjoy the game today.